This is Todd and Jay from Clario to talk about leveraging AI and the real cost of AI.
The last session on the last day is the toughest spot. The session before lunch is probably the second toughest spot. So, all right, we have a remote here. So, Todd Rudeau, I'm Chief Medical Officer for Clario. For those not familiar, we're an endpoint solutions company. We cover digital endpoints from medical imaging to cardiac safety to respiratory solutions, ECOA solutions, as you just heard about. I am thrilled to be speaking with our Chief Information and Technology Officer, Jay Farrow. Jay's team and my team work very close together on the topic we're going to be presenting today. I don't get a chance to present much with Jay, so this is a fun one for me, certainly. The collaboration between science and the developers of AI is a critical piece to controlling what we're going to talk about today, which is risk. How can it go wrong when you're applying AI in clinical studies? So glad to take questions as we go, or obviously feel free to hold until the end. I thought I would start with a survey just to get a flavor for what people are thinking in terms of their concerns for the use of AI in clinical studies. So this could be candidate selection all the way in the preclinical world. This could be study design. This could be AI to support recruitment, study operations or conduct of the study, data analysis. As you know, lots of different ways. If you search the scope agenda for AI, by the way, there's dozens, so you've landed in the most informative one, of course. But so 4 different options. We'll do this informally by show of hands. I'll read through them all once first so you can see what you're voting for, and then we'll go back and check your sort of personal greatest concern. So protection of patient data privacy rights is the first one. Second is the accuracy and reliability of data that's been generated or supported by the use of AI. Third is ethical considerations, so applying AI in human drug studies. Any concerns for this? And the fourth would be some other concern that I didn't touch on here. So just by show of hands, despite having a tech guy here, we didn't do a formal audience response system. So patient data privacy rights and using that to train AI would be the first one. Just a couple. Accuracy and reliability of data. Clearly the winner. It's a good thing that our talk mostly focuses on that, so that's good. Ethical considerations. Is it okay to use human subject AI in human subject research? All right, and then something else that maybe I'll raise at the end when we get to the Q&A part. So Jay's going to get us started off with definitions, just to get us all on the same page. I'm going to then take over and talk about the risk for bias, what can go wrong, and what can we do to help prevent that risk. And then we're also going to hit on our sort of Clario's responsible use principles that we've published, I guess, a few years ago now, actually, and have stuck to since, and highlight some changes in the regulatory landscape. And then we'll talk about some specific examples of where we're leveraging AI, and certainly happy to talk on the training process and what we did to mitigate risk there. So, Jay, I will turn over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you. I appreciate the kind words, and it's an honor to speak with Todd. I think as part of our AI journey, having good partnerships internally. I speak in a lot of CIO circles and CTO circles, and while that's more functionally based versus industry based, there are common themes that come through a lot of it, and having good partnerships internally is absolutely critical. And so having your chief medical officer aligned with your general counsel, along with your head of development, your head of AI, your CEO certainly, is an absolute blessing. And so that always helps things go forward. If you're here, chances are you know what this is. Surprisingly, AI was not invented in 2022 with the advent of ChatGPT. It certainly brought it to the forefront. That is for sure. For your kids who brought it to you in 2022, telling you it's the latest thing, you can say, it's actually been out for a while, and machine learning goes back quite a bit. It's a very broad term, but at its core, it refers to machines that can simulate human intelligence, right? Whether it's recognizing patterns, making predictions, generating text, image, etc. Machine learning is a crucial subset. It's something we've been at for quite a while, although we dip our toes in play very well in a number of other areas across the AI spectrum. Deep learning and neural networks take it to the next degree, allowing for advanced capabilities for high-speed data analysis, automation of previously manual tasks, et cetera. But it always depends on the quality of the data. The one common theme that you can look at across the AI spectrum is data quality. The management of that data runs true throughout it.
Okay, thanks. Let's go back there for a sec. So is it risky to deploy AI in clinical studies? And obviously many of you responded with at least some concern on this front. And I'm going to address that now over the next few minutes to talk about the importance of training data set selection and how that is, at least in my opinion, the singular greatest mitigation element sort of available to us, which is making sure that the tool is trained properly to not need to make up an answer, but actually know the answer. And so bias is a result of essentially an algorithm, as I just said, sort of not knowing how to answer a question, but also not knowing how to say, I don't know, and instead simply providing potentially an incorrect answer without any sort of flag to the end user. So there's a few different elements that can go into why this happens. As I mentioned, the training data set selection is probably the most important element. There could be flaws in actually how the algorithm was created or programmed, certainly, and then how the algorithm or the tool is being implemented is certainly a critical element as well, which I'll touch on. Just briefly, number two there, validation. So you can imagine, hundreds of thousands of CT scans from a clinical study and being able to use that massive data set to be able to train AI in some way. If we just take 30% of that data and call it the validation data set and the other, 2/3 and call it the training data set, we can end up in a scenario where our validation test shows remarkable performance and feel that we have 98% accuracy. But all we've done is proven that our training methodology was successful. We haven't actually demonstrated in real-world use with a different data set and different end users and different environment how that performance is. So the concept of training versus validation and just simply taking the same data set and carving out a piece of it, there's risks associated with that in terms of this sort of false sense of security in terms of how high-performing your algorithm is. Populations. This is the piece I'll probably spend the most time on here because I think it's probably most critical. Understanding the risk for bias in an AI-enabled output and how the population that was used to train that algorithm, but also the population in which you're now applying that algorithm will affect that. So age, race, ethnicity, gender, these are all things we think about in terms of population elements in clinical trials. Pediatrics versus adult is another, or I guess a component of what I just described. Obese versus normal weight individuals and how the algorithm or tool will perform in that. These are all examples that need to be considered when selecting a training data set and thinking about how it's going to be used. So I'll use just as an example with the pediatric versus adult first. My background, by the way, I'm a cardiologist, so of course I have to use an example using ECGs. You can imagine, literally millions of ECGs we have in a database, and we could train a tool to develop or detect, I should say, the most common problem with ECG quality in clinical trials, which is simply reversal of the right arm and left arm electrodes, right? Staff walks into the room, they pick up the electrode that says RA, right arm, they pick it up with their right hand and they put it directly onto the patient's left shoulder because they're facing the patient. ECG manufacturers have algorithms built in to detect this because it's so common, but as an example for today, since we see it in not an insignificant single-digit percentage of ECGs, we have a lot of examples of appropriate arm lead configuration and inappropriate. And so we can train a tool to detect that difference. And so if we take that tool and we train it on 500,000 adult ECGs, and then we deploy that tool into a clinical trial that is allowed to enroll patients down to, let's say, 6 months of age, we may think that our tool is incredibly well trained because we used a huge amount of data in doing so, but the performance of that algorithm in adults is not going to reflect the performance of that algorithm in a pediatric or an adolescent population because, as it turns out, kids have different ECGs than adults. And so that is just a sort of illustrative example of how we need to think about not just how robust is that tool, but then in what population was it developed versus in what population are we planning to deploy it. Similarly, you can imagine in an oncology setting where you have a tool that's designed to assist the radiologist in identifying metastases within the liver, right? It's a tool that we have today and use. And it's able to trace the outlines and give you the number of lesions and the dimensions of the lesions. And let's say that tool's been trained entirely on prostate cancer patients, right? Prostate cancer metastasized to the liver. And now we enroll a study of breast cancer patients, right, or colon cancer patients, or some other cancer that metastasized to the liver. You and I would all assume that the performance should be pretty similar, right? A liver metastases is a liver metastases. But what about hepatocellular cancer, right? Liver cancer that actually metastasized within the liver itself. Well, it turns out we can't necessarily just assume that an algorithm will perform the same. And so in training such a tool, we need to make sure all tumor types, realistically, or as feasible as possible, all tumor types were a part of that training data set, and that we tested it in different scenarios as well. And if we haven't tested it in different scenarios, then we shouldn't be deploying it into a future clinical study until we have some confidence in how it will perform. Number 4 there, with poor development tactics, the AI system is at high risk to perpetuate bias in production. The concept there, as I just touched on, is pretty straightforward, right? If we are inherently introducing bias by only training on adults, we run the risk that that algorithm will continue to perpetuate a lower degree of accuracy in a pediatric study. Scientific engagement can help is listed there, probably should be in bigger print in hindsight. This is really the piece that I alluded to in the beginning. The algorithm developers are sort of handed a training data set and told go, right? And come back to me when you have 95% plus accuracy. The scientist's job is to make sure that they've considered these issues that I just described. And so that collaboration between our two groups is really critical in making sure that when we're going to deploy a new tool, that we're confident in terms of how it was developed. Quickly, I'm going to talk about diversity, which seems like a pretty far tangent from the topic of AI, but actually, hopefully the parallels are already becoming clear. So diversity in clinical trials, we're typically talking about a mismatch between the epidemiology of a disease and the trial population, right? So lupus is the disease that has a high prevalence in African American females, but if you enroll a lupus study and only 10% of your subjects are African American females, you have a mismatch and you have a problem there on many levels, but not the least of which is the results of your study may not apply to the actual population with disease. And so the concept of why this is relevant here is, as I said, I hope pretty obvious at this point. The way in which a training data set was curated and how an AI algorithm is applied is limited by the diversity of the training data set. And that diversity may include some of the features that I mentioned before, but also race, gender, ethnicity, as we are typically talking about when we think about diversity in clinical studies. So as I alluded to, we have this set of responsible use principles that we published, I guess it's a few years ago now, and have not edited or needed to deviate from them since. All of the AI tools that we're going to be talking about have been developed under this sort of set of principles. I've already touched on the top left, which is the importance of minimizing bias and selecting an appropriate training data set and training paradigm in order to do that. The top right is about transparency, so making sure the end user has a clear understanding of how was that tool developed, was it developed for this intended use that I'm about to do so. And I recognize, by the way, everything is very abstract. I keep talking about AI-enabled tools, and as we get to the end of this and highlight some examples, it'll become a bit more clear. At the bottom, at the 6 o'clock position there, mitigating risks. So most of what I've been referring to has been how do you up front make a development decision to reduce the risk that your algorithm is going to come up with the wrong answer, reducing the risk of bias. This mitigating risk principle is at the other end of this, which is that we've now deployed an algorithm in the current context of a clinical study. What can we do to minimize any sort of downstream effect if the output is incorrect? And so human oversight is a critical element here. There's no instances in our company where we have an AI algorithm independently handling patient data without any degree of human oversight to ensure the accuracy of that. How you deploy it is obviously just as critical of an element of reducing risk as to versus how it was developed in the first place. On the right side here is privacy rights. So there's obviously concern, and I'm sure some of you in the audience are from sponsors and wondering, has my data been used in the training of these tools you're going to be talking about today? We have a pretty strict process, actually, on a couple different levels. One is actually looking at contracts to make sure we don't have any specific language that prohibits that use. But most importantly, and in my opinion, more importantly, aggregated and anonymized data sets are sort of a core principle for us. None of our tools have been developed without first aggregating across multiple studies, anonymizing it in such a way that nothing is traceable back to any individual patient, certainly any individual sponsor, any individual protocol, and therefore we can, be confident that everything we're doing sort of downstream of that has not violated any individual privacy rights in any way. But I think it's an important one. It's particularly important for us because obviously we have a lot of sponsors and we want to make sure we're adhering to, or customers, and make sure we're adhering to their rights. But this aggregated and anonymized data set concept is one that is pretty critical for us. And then the last piece, which I'm going to turn over to Jay to talk about, is the regulatory landscape. One of the sort of responsible use principles here is making sure that we are acting in a compliant way and not deploying AI in any way that would violate our very rapidly evolving landscape. So, Jay, I'll turn it over to you here.
Thanks, Todd. AI regulation is a bit of a moving target, not surprisingly. Over the last few years, though, things are coming into focus. You're seeing key themes. And also, not surprisingly, Europe has led the charge with the EU AI Act, which I think was launched in 2021, finalized in August of last year. The first comprehensive AI law effective at the end of last year. And it has set, much like GDPR did, a global precedent for AI regulation. In the United States, also not surprisingly for the third time, each state, it's a bit of a hodgepodge, right? There are some AI laws that exist at the state level. Colorado, Utah, Tennessee, a number of others are coming into focus, while federal agencies have provided some non-binding guidance. What we see over the next 4 years may or may not come into focus, but the FDA, however, is moving a bit more rapidly than it is used to, and in bringing this into focus, which is wonderful. In speaking with the FDA, though, their focus generally is pretty clear. It will, again, in the general sense, it will regulate AI as much as it affects patient safety and data integrity, not so much on the operational efficiency side. That's an area that it's not really going to play in, right? The operational efficiency side. But as soon as you get into anything that is patient safety related or data integrity related, they have something to say about it, appropriately so. But regardless of formal regulation, transparency, as Todd talked about, bias mitigation, patient privacy are essential to earning trust, because at the end of the day, it comes down to trust. And making sure that AI is deployed in the right way, with real guardrails, with real human oversight, and real controls, right? Like anything we do in our industry, it all comes down to trust and integrity. Next slide. Thank you. We have taken much like the FDA has and the EU has, a risk-based approach to AI regulation. I think it's important that one size does definitely not fit all. Consumer-grade ChatGPT, an autonomous car, your refrigerator telling you that your eggs are spoiled, all of those things are not the same as evaluating patient data in a clinical trial. Again, I think the EU will lead the charge in this risk-based approach. It categorizes AI based on risk, banning some high-risk applications outright while allowing and giving people kind of free rein with the lower risk AI implementations with minimal oversight. In the US, I think the approach is going to be more fragmented with state-level laws and the FDA coming in over top. In clinical trials, the key concerns regulators have, Todd touched on: bias, transparency, patient privacy, oversight, et cetera. We don't want that oversight and all of that to hamstring the tremendous efficiency gains of this game-changing technology. And I think you can walk the line between trust, oversight, regulation, while not stifling innovation. Tom? Oh yeah, well, we've been at it for a minute. And AI is not just an experiment. We've been diving in since 2018. As a matter of fact, today we have developed over 50 AI models, all scientifically validated, integrated 30 of those into our core platform, and actively use AI in over 800 clinical trials. Benefits ranging from things Todd touched on, improving data quality, reducing errors, enhancing patient safety and privacy. But our approach is grounded in scientific, rigorous validation, and we would never deploy an AI model unless it has gone the scrutiny in the real-world testing that Todd talked about.
So, thanks, Jay. What I'm going to do is walk through a few examples from each of those three categories that Jay highlighted. I'll go quickly because I know we're getting close on time, but I think some of these really highlight the principles that we were just talking about, and certainly afterwards, happy to take questions on any of these. This is a focus on patient privacy and what we can do with AI to increase patient, either redaction of PII in the case of a text example, or any other, elements of electronic data that could be used to identify a patient. I'll highlight the bottom left one because I think that's sort of the coolest of them all. MRIs, so let's use example of a brain MRI in a CNS study. The data that we receive is entirely cross-sectional, right? There is no picture of the patient's face. But there was a publication in the New England Journal just maybe about 3 or 4 years ago now, where they looked at cross-sectional data, had a tool that was able to recreate what the patient's face looked like, and then used facial recognition software with a set of photographs from those patients. And it was like 89, I think, % accurate in identifying whose MRI came from which patient, just based on cross-sectional data only. So entirely plausible to recreate a patient face. There's an obvious solution, which you do with standard video, which is blur the patient's face. But the hard part here is doing so in a cross-sectional image data set without actually affecting the data that you need to interpret, the brain itself or the sinuses if it's something up front or something like that. So this is a tool we've developed and validated and don't routinely need to use it in most settings, but certainly when a data set of MRI cross-sections needs to be transferred somewhere or is going to be used in some by a third party, for example, we have the option to do this extra step and remove any identifying features from that scan. The other elements on there are less exciting and things you've seen before, redacting text automatically. Very helpful for a clinical trial site. They simply load the document and the AI tool at the site, or installed locally at the site, I should say, is going to do all the redaction work, so the site doesn't have to identify this, and then we have a QC process to make sure everything's been redacted. So great tool from a site perspective, not the most sort of technically challenging tool necessarily. A few examples of where we're using AI to improve data quality. I think this is where we can really move the needle in terms of reducing risk for missing data, reducing noise in a data set that can affect power for primary endpoint. Just 2 examples here from a medical imaging perspective. One is the scenario where you have a expectation to receive a CT scan of the liver, and you subsequently receive 80% of the liver, right? The slices that were high up in the liver near the lungs were just simply not transmitted. A human is going to QC that eventually, potentially within days, but not within minutes or hours, well, minutes really, of the upload. This is a tool that's been developed and deployed, again, locally, such that when the site uploads, they immediately are flagged of the potential deficiency. And instead of having a missing time point, because that data just can't be fully interpreted, the site gets an immediate flag to, hey, can you upload those last 3 slices for us? And then we're all set. The one on the right is another kind of cool example, patient verification. Assuming this isn't your first time point in the study, but it's your second or third or fourth, if the data from that time point is uploaded and doesn't appear to match, right? The certain anatomical features tell us that that is not from the same patient, and maybe a subject ID has been transcribed incorrectly, the AA will flag that immediately and again have the opportunity for the site to make a correction. Something that a human radiologist likely would have picked up when they do a comparison, but that could be again hours, or in the case of some studies are read retrospectively, so it could be weeks or months later, at which point it's too hard to make any sort of correction. From the cardiac side, this is a solution that's able to do an automatic assessment of a continuous ECG recording and look for data quality problems. So in a first-in-human study, it's very common to use 24-hour recordings, collect those, kind of upload them or ship them off, and at the end of the study, we can do some retrospective look at all of that continuous ECG data to look for QT effects, for example. Well, what if at the end of every cohort, and particularly the lowest cohort in the case of a single ascending dose study, we can use an AI tool to quickly assess the quality and alert the site, hey, you've got a problem. One of your machines isn't working, you have a lead reversal, you have a tech who's forgetting to clean the skin, whatever it might be. Before higher doses are administered, we can ensure that that data is of high quality and will be analyzable later. Spirometry, if you've ever done a spirometry test yourself, you know how difficult it is to ensure 100% effort on behalf of the patient. Even the best, respiratory therapists have trouble coaching some patients. We have a tool that can do an automatic assessment of a flow volume loop and check to confirm that, in fact, it was a full effort spirogram. If you're running a study of an asthma drug or a COPD drug, this is your primary endpoint, and this is an incredibly noisy data type and difficult to do well. And using AI at the time of the actual breathing test can really significantly make an increase in the quality of data. Efficiency in clinical trials. So Jay alluded to this. How can we make a difference from that perspective? I talked about that CT scan example where the software is able to automatically detect different metastases. That's one example of being able to sort of shorten the time for the radiologist, but not necessarily do the work for the radiologist, right? Lots of other examples on the slide here. I'm going to skip past. This is an example of the RESIST criteria. This was actually referred to earlier today in one of the other sessions, and the ability of the scan to differentiate primary lesion versus secondary lesions and track them from one time point to another, so the radiologist is definitely measuring the same lesion when comparing two different time points. The last example for me, and then I'm going to turn back to Jay, is regarding an ulcerative colitis tool, or really any inflammatory bowel disease is how this can be applied. Video endoscopy is a centralized solution that we offer in order to reduce the variability from one site to the next. So you don't have different gastroenterologists giving their own independent interpretation of what does the scope show. You have a video that's taken and then a core lab essentially model where you have independent gastroenterologists that do the work. That already moves the needle pretty significantly in terms of data quality by reducing that variability. One step further is this tool, which is able to do an analysis frame by frame of the entire video endoscopy and automatically assign a score of severity of colitis for the gastroenterologist to then go back and confirm, highlighting regions of interest, right, saving time, and also increasing the consistency from one read to the next, because the AI tool is taking the same approach each time. Again, not eliminating the human, but simply augmenting their productivity. Claire is a tool that's not a machine learning based tool, but rather a bit different. I'll let Jay talk about this one.
Yep, it's our generative AI, and given our company name is Clario, you can see the leap we took there to call it Claire. We're not just using it, we're building our dedicated platform. Claire is our productivity ecosystem. It's a scalable framework to ensure that AI isn't just implemented piecemeal, but is fully integrated, validated, and aligned with our regulatory expectations. But this is the more traditional usage of generative AI, doing protocol analysis, internal things like taking product management and helping them create user stories, those efficiencies and effectiveness. But Claire is something that is rapidly changing. I think when we launched Claire, we had a little baby picture here. Now Claire is a fully formed, which was far creepier than this picture. Claire is a rapidly maturing adult, and it's pretty exciting. And I will tell a quick very quick sidebar anecdote. I was with our sales team last year. Todd and I both were last week. And in all the different breakouts, I heard people talking about Claire, not because I was in the room, but just because they're beginning to use it as being part of our DNA, which is something that is wonderful, where the fear, uncertainty, and doubt around AI and how to use it each day is disappearing. I think everybody's very familiar with ChatGPT, but doing it in a contained way that is validated, that's secure, et cetera, I think gives people less pause. Last but not least, and I'll turn the microphone over to Todd here again in a second to put a bow on it, but is AI is it too risky? The answer, I think, is no with an asterisk. It's no with an asterisk. It's not absolutely not too risky. It's going to transform clinical trials. It's already transforming clinical trials, speed, accuracy, efficiency, but you have to do it holistically and manage the risks. You have to do it and manage the risks. Be aware of the regulations. Do it holistically within your organization. Or if you're not building it internally, make sure your partner is doing it the right way. And then last but not least, understanding and develop those mitigation strategies for those risks holistically. Todd?
Great, thanks. So I think you summed it up well. I don't think any of you need to be convinced of the potential benefits of AI. I think hopefully this gave you some insight into the potential risks and most importantly, how to manage or mitigate those risks, through that framework that we described. Appreciate we're over time and there's lunch on the terrace. Questions I'm happy to take on stage here, or Jay and I will both hang out for a few minutes afterwards and talk with any of you individually as well.
Really appreciate you all being here. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Questions?
Yep, thanks.
No? All right. Well, thank you for a wonderful presentation. Thank you, everyone. It is now lunchtime. Lunch is out on the terrace. It's the same place where the luau was yesterday. You just follow up these stairs, then down the stairs, then outside. Thank you, everyone.